My wife came home dragging her suitcase behind her after a 3-week trip through Europe, and the man walking in beside her was her new lover. She dropped a folder onto the coffee table, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "Sign the divorce papers, you useless old man." Before I could answer, my grandson slowly stood from the sofa. He stared at her and whispered, "Grandma, you really don't know." Then he placed an iPad in her hands. She looked at the screen, and every trace of color vanished from her face. If this story already has your heart racing, you are exactly where you need to be. Welcome to Revenge Dad. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I love knowing who's in the room with me. Please note this story contains fictional elements created for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or places is coincidental, but everything it teaches you is worth keeping. I heard the suitcase wheels before I saw her. That sound hard plastic rolling across hardwood floors cut straight through the evening news I had on in the background, straight through the smell of the coffee going cold on my desk, straight through 60 years of a life I thought I understood. I set down the folder I was reading and walked out of my home office into the hallway, and that is when I saw my wife of 35 years standing in the middle of our living room with another man behind her. Her name is Elaine. She is 57 years old. She has brown hair that she started coloring at 42, and green eyes that I fell in love with at a rooftop party in Manhattan in the spring of 1989. She was wearing a cream-colored coat I had never seen before, and her cheeks were flushed the way they get when she has been traveling and is running on adrenaline instead of sleep. She looked in that moment like a woman who had made a decision and was not going to let herself feel it yet. The man behind her was tall, broad-shouldered. He wore a charcoal blazer over a dark turtleneck, and he stood just inside my front door with his arms crossed over his chest, like he was already measuring the square footage of my home and calculating what it might be worth. I had never seen him before in my life, but I knew exactly who he was. His name, I would later confirm, was Victor Hayes, 45 years old. He called himself a hedge fund manager out of Greenwich, Connecticut. He had the kind of tan that comes from expensive vacations and the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes. He was the man my wife had spent the last 14 months building a secret life with, and he was standing in my living room on a Friday evening in December like he had every right to be there. Elaine set her handbag down on the side table, the same side table where we kept the keys and the mail and the ceramic bowl my son Ethan made in a pottery class when he was 9 years old. She pulled a manila folder from her tote and placed it on the coffee table with both hands smoothing the edges like she was presenting a report at a board meeting. Then she looked at me. "Sign the divorce papers," she said. "You useless old man." I want to be honest about what happened inside my chest when those words came out of her mouth. It was not anger, not right away. It was something closer to the feeling you get when you step off a curb you did not know was there, that half second of freefall before your body catches up with the situation. 35 years, a house, a son, a business built from nothing. And the woman who had stood beside me through all of it was now looking at me like I was a stranger she was tired of sharing space with. My hands stayed at my sides. I did not reach for the folder. Victor uncrossed his arms and shifted his weight, and the floorboard under his left foot gave that small creak it has always given the one I keep meaning to fix, and never do. He glanced around the living room with the slow assessing look of a man who is already thinking about what furniture he would replace first. "Elaine," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Who is this?" "You know who he is," she said, her chin lifted slightly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Richard. The papers are straightforward. The house, the accounts, a portion of the business. Frank can contest whatever he wants, but my attorney has already reviewed everything. You sign tonight, and we can all move forward." "Move forward," I repeated. That's what I said. Victor cleared his throat. It was a small sound, barely anything, but it carried the specific weight of a man who is used to being the most important person in whatever room he occupies. "Richard," he said like we were old acquaintances, like my name in his mouth was something ordinary. "This doesn't have to be a difficult evening. Elaine has thought about this very carefully. The decision has been made. The decision has been made." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I felt something harden in the center of my chest. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter and more permanent than rage. The kind of feeling that does not burn and does not shake. It just settles in and stays. I was about to speak when I heard movement from the corner of the room. I had almost forgotten Ryan was there. My grandson, 17 years old, nearly 6 feet tall, now in a way that still surprises me, had been sitting on the far end of the sofa when I walked in, his backpack on the cushion beside him, his earbuds around his neck. He comes over most Friday evenings. It is a habit we fell into after his parents moved to a house 20 minutes away, and it became the kind of habit that stops feeling like a habit and starts feeling like the shape of your week. He had been doing homework when Elaine walked in. He had gone very still. Now he stood up. He was not moving quickly. He did not look frightened or confused. He moved the way he moves when he has already thought through something and arrived at the other side of it, deliberate calm, with his jaw set in a way that reminded me so sharply of Ethan at the same age that my throat tightened without warning. He looked at his grandmother. Elaine's eyes moved to him. Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or the specific discomfort of being witnessed by someone you love, in a moment you are not proud of. "Ryan," she said, and her voice shifted, just slightly softened at the edges, the way it always does when she speaks to him. "Sweetheart, why don't you go upstairs and, Grandma?" His voice was quiet. It was not a shout, not an accusation. It landed in the room the way a heavy book lands on a table, solid, final, impossible to ignore. He looked straight at her, and his eyes did not waver. "You really don't know?" Elaine's lips parted. Victor went very still behind her. Ryan reached into the front pocket of his backpack and pulled out an iPad. The screen was already on, already open to something. He held it out toward his grandmother with both hands, and the gesture was so careful, so deliberate, that it almost looked like an offering. Elaine's hand rose slowly. She took it. She looked down at the screen. I watched the color leave her face. It did not happen all at once. It moved through her the way cold moves through a room when a window opens in winter, gradual, spreading, unstoppable. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the iPad. The folder on the coffee table, the one she had smoothed so carefully, the one with the papers she had flown home from 3 weeks in Europe to deliver, sat untouched between us. Victor leaned forward slightly, trying to see the screen. Ryan turned it away from him. The thing about watching someone's face fall apart is that it does not happen the way you expect it to. You expect tears maybe, or shouting, or the kind of dramatic collapse you see in movies where a person grabs the edge of a table to hold themselves up. What actually happened to Elaine was quieter than any of that, and somehow worse. The blood drained from her cheeks in a slow, steady retreat, like a tide going out. Her lips pressed together until they went pale. The hand holding the iPad began to tremble, not violently. Just a fine, barely visible shake, the kind that starts deep in the bones, when the body understands something before the mind is ready to accept it. She read whatever was on that screen for a long time, longer than I expected. Her eyes moved left to right, and with every pass, I watched something shift behind them. Confusion first, then recognition, then a particular kind of stillness that I had never seen on her face before. The stillness of a person standing at the edge of a very high place, looking down. Victor could not see the screen. Ryan had angled it deliberately, holding it just out of his line of sight, and Victor was leaning now, his body tilting toward Elaine, with his neck craning forward, jaw tight, with a frustration he was working hard not to show. "Elaine," he said low and controlled. "Give me the tablet." Elaine did not move. "Elaine." His voice hardened at the edges. "Give it to me right now." Her head turned toward him slowly, the way a person turns to look at something they are not sure they want to see clearly. Her green eyes found his face. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked back down at the screen. She did not give him the iPad. Victor straightened up. His jaw worked once, twice. He looked at Ryan, 17 years old, standing in the middle of the living room, with his arms loose at his sides, his chin level, his expression carrying the specific and devastating calm of someone who has been preparing for this exact moment for a very long time. "Where did you get that?" Victor asked him. Ryan met his eyes. "That's not really your concern, is it, Mr. Hayes?" The way he said it, not rude, not heated, just factual, like he was correcting a minor error in a math problem, made something tighten in my throat. This was my grandson, 17 years old. He should have been upstairs doing homework, or texting his friends, or arguing with his father about curfew. Instead, he was standing in the middle of what felt like the longest night of my life, and holding his ground with a composure that men twice his age could not manage. I wanted to go to him. I wanted to put my hand on his shoulder and tell him he did not have to be here for this. But I also understood, in the way you understand things that have already happened and cannot be changed, that Ryan had chosen to be exactly here, exactly now, and that the choice had not been made tonight. Victor took a step toward him. "Mr. Hayes." The voice came from the staircase. We all turned. My son Ethan was standing on the fourth step, from the bottom, one hand resting on the railing. He is 38 years old, 6'1", and he has the same dark eyes his mother has or had before tonight, and the same broad shoulders I see in photographs of myself from 30 years ago. He was wearing a gray Henley and dark jeans, and he looked like a man who had been sitting quietly in a house for several hours waiting for a specific thing to happen, which, as I would learn, was exactly what he had been doing. "Step away from my son," Ethan said. His voice was even and clear. There was no anger in it. There did not need to be. Victor stopped moving. Ethan came down the remaining steps and crossed the room to stand beside Ryan. He put one hand briefly on the back of Ryan's neck, a small, firm gesture the kind fathers make when they want their children to know they are not alone. And then he looked at me. "Dad," he said, "I need you to sit down." "Ethan," my voice came out rough. "What is going on? How long have you— Please sit down first." He said it gently, but without room for argument, the way he sometimes speaks in meetings when a situation is getting away from everyone and someone needs to pull it back. "I promise I'll explain everything, but I need you sitting down when I do." I sat. Elaine's eyes moved from Ethan to me and back again. Something was happening behind them that I could not fully read, not guilt, not exactly, or not only guilt. Something more complicated, something that looked from where I was sitting like a woman beginning to understand that the ground she had been standing on for the past 14 months was not as solid as she had believed. "Ethan," she said, her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "How long have you been in this house?" "Since 4 o'clock, he said. 4, she stopped, swallowed. "You've been here for 2 hours. 2 hours and 14 minutes, Ryan said, without looking up from the iPad he was still holding. He had taken it back from Elaine at some point, gently, without ceremony, and was now navigating to something on the screen with the focused expression of a person who knows exactly where they are going. Elaine pressed her fingers against her lips. Her eyes were bright now, not with tears, not yet, but with the specific pressure of emotions that have not yet decided which direction to go. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. She looked at Victor, and Victor looked back at her. And I watched him give her a small, tight shake of his head that was meant to communicate something. Stay calm, say nothing, hold the line, and I watched Elaine look away from him first. That was the moment I understood that something had already broken even before whatever was on that iPad had been shown to anyone. Ethan turned to me. He held out his hand, and Ryan placed the iPad in it, with the careful precision of someone handing over something that matters. 5 months ago, Ethan said, one of our designers at the office, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who has worked with us for 6 years, and who I trust completely, came to me after she overheard a phone call. Elaine had taken it in the small conference room off the main floor, not realizing the door hadn't latched fully behind her. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough to know I needed to hear it. He paused. "I made a decision not to tell you right away, Dad. I want to explain why, because I need you to understand. It was not because I doubted you. It was because if you had known, and if it had shown, if Elaine had seen it in your face, or in the way you came home at night, or in a single conversation, she would have known that we knew. And everything we were building would have been gone." My chest felt like something heavy had been placed on it and left there. 5 months, I said. "Yes. You carried this for 5 months. Ethan looked at me steadily. "You carried this company for 30 years, Dad. I think I can manage 5 months. I had to look away from him then because there are moments when your children show you who they have become, and the feeling it produces is too large for the room you are sitting in. I looked at the window. I looked at the dark glass and the faint reflection of the lamp and the outline of a man I barely recognized as myself. Behind me, I heard Victor shift his weight. "This is a performance," he said. His voice had recovered some of its earlier smoothness, but there was something underneath it now, a thin edge like a crack in good china. Whatever that tablet contains, it has been curated to tell a specific story. You're all standing here congratulating yourselves on a setup, and you haven't even looked at what you think you have. Ethan turned to him. "Mr. Hayes," he said pleasantly, I have spent 5 months looking at what we have. I am very confident in what we have. He held up the iPad. Would you like to start with the messages, or would you prefer I begin somewhere else? Victor did not answer right away. He was the kind of man who understood that silence deployed correctly could function as a weapon, that making someone wait for your response was a way of communicating that their question did not particularly concern you. He had probably used that technique in boardrooms and negotiations and difficult conversations for the better part of 2 decades. He used it now standing in my living room, with his arms loose at his sides and his expression carefully neutral, and for approximately 4 seconds, it almost worked. Then Ethan tapped the screen and turned the iPad around to face the room. "We'll start with the messages," Ethan said. The television in the corner was still on. I had never turned it off when I came out of my office and the sound of a weather forecast drifted through the room, a man's calm voice talking about a cold front moving in from the north. Ethan reached over without looking and clicked it off. The room went quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the quiet before something is said that cannot be unsaid. On the iPad screen was a message thread, 2 names at the top. One of them was Elaine. These messages were exchanged over a period of 8 months. Ethan said, addressing the room the way he sometimes addresses a quarterly review, methodical, clear, without unnecessary emotion. Between Mom's personal cell phone and a number registered to Victor Hayes at an address in Greenwich, Connecticut. I'm going to read several of them. I want Dad to hear them directly. Ethan, stop! Elaine's voice had gone tight and thin, the way a wire sounds when it is pulled too hard. She stepped forward, one hand out. You don't understand what you're looking at? Those messages are out of context. They don't, Mom. Ethan looked at her, just looked at her steady and without flinching. Please don't do that. Something in his voice, not anger, not accusation, just a deep and aching disappointment that was somehow more devastating than either, made her stop. Her hand dropped. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Ethan looked back at the screen. September 14th, he said. Victor writes, R still has no idea. The longer we wait, the better position you'll be in when we move. Make sure you know where the business and corporation documents are kept. We'll need them. Ethan paused for exactly 1 beat. Mom replies, he keeps everything in the safe in his office and a backup with Frank. Getting to Frank won't be easy, but I'll figure it out. The room felt like it contracted. I was sitting in the armchair by the window, the one with the slightly worn armrest that I keep meaning to reupholster, and I felt the muscles in my back go rigid one by one, like a structure bracing for impact. I had read contracts for 30 years. I had negotiated with suppliers and developers and difficult clients and city inspectors. I understood in a technical sense what those words meant. But understanding something technically and hearing it spoken aloud in your own living room by your own son while your wife stands 8 feet away from you are 2 entirely different experiences. That's one exchange, Ethan continued. There are 47 others. I won't read all of them tonight. He scrolled slightly. But I want to read one more. October 22nd. Victor writes, the LLC is set up. Once Richard signs everything, transfers within 72 hours. He won't know what he's signed until it's done. Ethan's voice did not waver. Mom replies, he trusts me. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him. He always has. I heard Ryan make a sound beside me, a small sound barely audible somewhere between a breath and something else. He was standing close enough that I could feel the tension in him. His whole body had gone tight, the way a young person's body goes tight when they are angry and have made a decision not to show it. I reached over and put my hand on his arm. He did not pull away. Victor moved first. He uncrossed his arms and spread his hands in a gesture of practiced reasonableness, the kind of gesture that says I am a calm and rational person, and everything here is being misrepresented. What Victor did not know, what Ethan had been careful for exactly this reason never to mention in front of him, was that the forensic examiner's report had been sitting in the Attorney General's file for 3 weeks already. He played his card the way a man plays a card he believes no one else has seen. Richard, he said, turning to me with the particular confidence of a man who has talked his way out of rooms before. I understand how this looks, I do. But context matters enormously here, and what your son is presenting is a selective, very selective reading of private communications that were taken without consent and cannot be legally. They were taken from a backup file that synced automatically to a shared family account, Ethan said without looking up from the iPad. A shared account that Mom set up in 2019 and never removed Dad from. There is no question of legality. The access was entirely authorized. He finally looked at Victor. But thank you for bringing up the law, Mr. Hayes. We're going to be spending a lot of time on that subject tonight. Victor's jaw tightened. The smooth surface of him was still there, the even tan, the pressed blazer, the posture of a man who belongs in expensive rooms. But something underneath it had shifted, a hairline fracture barely visible running through the whole performance. Elaine had not spoken since Ethan read the messages. She was standing near the coffee table, her hands pressed together in front of her, and her face had moved through so many things in the past few minutes that I had lost track of where it had landed. There was something happening behind her eyes that I recognized, but could not name the look of a person who has been telling themselves a particular story for a long time and is beginning against their will to hear the holes in it. Elaine, I said. Her eyes came to me. Did you write those messages? Her chin trembled once, just once. Then it went still. Richard, did you write them? It was not a question the second time. She heard the difference. I watched her here. It watched the slight recoil, the way her shoulders pulled, in the way her hands pressed harder together until the knuckles went pale. Yes, she said. But it wasn't. Thank you, I said. I did not say anything else. I looked at my hands in my lap, the hands that had cut wood and poured concrete and shaken 1,000 client hands and built something from nothing for 30 years. And I breathed in slowly and breathed out slowly, and reminded myself that I had known in some corridor of myself that I had refused to walk down, that this moment was coming. I had just not known it would feel like this, like a key turning in a lock you did not know existed, opening a door into a room that had been there all along. Ryan moved closer to me. He did not say anything. He just moved until his shoulder was almost touching mine, and he stayed there. And that small proximity, 17 years old, my daughter-in-law's eyes and my son's jaw, and something entirely his own, was the thing that kept the room from tilting completely off its axis. Ethan lowered the iPad. There are 4 more folders, he said. He was looking at Victor now, and his voice had taken on the specific quality it gets when he has finished being patient and moved into something harder and quieter on the other side of it. And I think you already know what's in them, but we're going to go through all of them anyway, because my father deserves to hear every single word. Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Elaine. Then he looked at me. Something passed through his expression that I could not quite categorize. Not regret, not remorse. Something more tactical than either a rapid private reassessment, a man rearranging pieces on a board he was beginning to realize was not the board he had thought he was playing on. Fine, Victor said. His voice was smooth again, recovered, almost convincing. Show him everything. Let's get it all out in the open. He said it like a man calling a bluff. He said it like a man who did not yet understand that there was no bluff to call. Ethan let Victor's words settle in the room for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened the second folder. Before I show you this, he said, I want to make sure everyone in this room understands something clearly. He was not looking at Victor when he said it. He was looking at his mother. What I'm about to present is not something I put together. It is public record. It has been public record for 14 months. Anyone with a laptop and a basic understanding of how to search court filings could have found it. He paused. Which makes what happened in this house over the past year considerably more difficult to explain. Elaine's eyes dropped to the floor. Ethan turned the iPad around. On the screen was a document header, official, formatted, bearing the seal of the state of New York at the top. Below it, in the kind of dense legal language that takes a moment to parse, was a notice of investigation issued by the New York Attorney General's office. The name at the center of the document was Victor Hayes. The New York Attorney General, Ethan said, his voice measured and clear, is the chief law enforcement officer of the state of New York, under a law called the Martin Act, which was passed in 1921 and is considered one of the most powerful securities fraud statutes in the entire country. The Attorney General has broad authority to investigate and prosecute financial fraud, including what is commonly known as a Ponzi scheme. He looked at Victor. A Ponzi scheme, for anyone who needs the definition, is a fraudulent investment operation in which returns paid to earlier investors are funded not by actual profit, but by money taken from newer investors. The operation collapses when there are not enough new investors to pay the old ones. Victor said nothing. The investigation into Victor Hayes was opened 14 months ago, Ethan continued. The alleged scheme involved approximately $12 million in misappropriated funds from 43 investors across Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. As of 6 weeks ago, a civil asset freeze order was granted by the New York Supreme Court, which means that Victor Hayes' personal bank accounts, his investment accounts, his property holdings, and any other assets held in his name are currently frozen. He cannot access them. He cannot transfer them. He cannot use them as collateral. Ethan set the iPad down on the coffee table so that the document was visible to everyone in the room. He has, in practical terms, nothing. The word landed like something dropped from a height. Nothing. I watched Victor's face in the moment after Ethan said it, and what I saw there was not anger, not indignation, not even the smooth and practiced denial he had deployed earlier. What I saw was a microsecond of exposure, a fraction of a second in which the architecture of the man dropped away and something rawer and more desperate showed through before the mask came back up smoother than before, the way a practiced poker player recovers after a tell. But I had seen it, and I understood in that moment with a clarity that felt almost like physical pain, the full shape of what had been happening in my home for the past 14 months. Victor had not come here for Elaine. He had come here for what Elaine could give him access to. "This is defamatory," Victor said. His voice was still controlled, but there was an undertone to it now, a low pressurized quality like steam finding a crack. "An investigation is not a conviction. An asset freeze is a temporary measure that my attorneys are actively contesting. You are presenting an incomplete legal picture to your father and calling it evidence, and I will not stand here and und damauer." "The freeze has been in place for 6 weeks, Ethan said. "Your attorneys filed a motion to lift it on November 8th. The motion was denied on November 19th. That denial is also in the folder if you'd like to see it." Victor's mouth closed. Elaine made a sound. It was small, barely more than a breath, catching wrong in the throat, but in the quiet of that room, it was the loudest thing that had happened in the past 5 minutes. Her hand came up and pressed against her sternum, flat-palmed the way you press on something that is hurting. And you are not sure if pressure helps, but you do it anyway, because you need to do something. 14 months, she said. The words came out slowly like she was testing each one before she let it into the air. "Victor, you told me you said the investigation was—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "You said it was a misunderstanding, a clerical error. You said it would be resolved in a matter of weeks." Victor looked at her. "Elaine, that was 14 months ago. The legal process takes time. You know that. My attorneys—" "Your attorneys filed a motion," Ethan said pleasantly, "and lost 3 weeks ago." Elaine's hand was still pressed against her chest. Her eyes were moving between Victor and the document on the iPad screen and some middle distance that none of the rest of us could see, and I recognized the look on her face because I had seen it once before years ago when we got a call in the middle of the night that her father had been taken to the hospital, and we both understood, before anyone said anything, that he was not coming back. It was the look of a person whose world has just rearranged itself into a shape they do not yet know how to inhabit. Ryan had moved during Ethan's presentation. He was standing closer to me now, close enough that I could see the muscle working in his jaw, the tight rhythmic clench and release of a young man who is angry in the specific way that young people are angry when they see someone they love being hurt and cannot do anything to stop it. I reached over and put my hand on the back of his neck, the way I used to when he was small and frightened, and I felt him exhale a long, slow breath that let some of the tension out of his shoulders. "Victor," I spoke for the first time in several minutes, and my voice surprised me, steady low, without any of the trembling I might have expected from a man whose chest felt like it had been hollowed out and refilled with something cold and heavy. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly man to man, because I think you owe me at least that much." Victor looked at me. His expression was careful, watchful. "Did you come into my home tonight," I said, "because you wanted to build a life with my wife, or did you come into my home tonight because you needed my assets to cover what you have already lost?" The room held its breath. Victor said nothing for 4 seconds, 5, 6. And in that silence, in the space where an innocent man would have answered immediately, where a man who genuinely loved my wife would have answered immediately, the answer came through anyway. Clearly. Undeniably. Elaine heard it too. I watched her hear it. Watched the last of the color leave her face, not the gradual retreat from before, but a sudden complete departure, as though something that had been holding her upright had quietly let go. Her hand dropped from her chest. Her shoulders curved inward. She looked at Victor with an expression I had never seen on her face before, not in 35 years of marriage, not in the years of distance that had come before tonight, and what was in it was not anger. What was in it was the dawning devastating recognition of a woman who has just understood that she was never part of the plan. "There's more," Ethan said quietly. He picked up the iPad again. His voice was gentler now, not for Victor's benefit, but for hers. "Mom, I need you to see one more thing. If you are still with me on Revenge Dad, right now drop the number 5 in the comments so I know you're here. Because what Ethan is about to show his mother next is something she never saw coming, and honestly, neither did I." Quick note, parts of this story include fictional elements built for storytelling purposes. Some details may not reflect any specific situation. If that's not your kind of content, it's completely okay to step away now. Ethan did not open the third folder immediately. He set the iPad face down on the coffee table, and in the breath of quiet that followed, he looked at his mother. The way you look at someone when you love them, and what you are about to do is going to hurt them, and there is no other way through it. "Mom," he said, "I need you to understand something before I show you this. What happened to you, the way he approached you, the things he said, the way he made you feel seen and chosen, that was not an accident. That was not spontaneous. It was a method, and you were not the first person he used it on." Elaine's lips parted. Her eyes searched Ethan's face, and I watched her want to argue, watched the reflex rise and then falter as something in his expression stopped it. "What do you mean?" she said. It came out barely above a whisper. Ethan picked up the iPad and turned it over. The third folder contained 2 names, 2 photographs, 2 sets of court documents pulled from public records, the kind of filings that anyone can access through the New York and New Jersey court systems, the kind that sit in databases for years waiting for someone to look. "Patricia Hendricks," Ethan said, 54 years old, Westchester County, New York, widowed in 2018. Met Victor Hayes at a charity auction in White Plains approximately 2 years ago. Within 6 months, she had signed over power of attorney for her financial accounts to a company Victor controlled. She lost $430,000, the entirety of her late husband's life insurance payout, before she realized what had happened. He paused. She filed a civil lawsuit, not criminal civil. Her attorneys told her a criminal case would take years, and she might not live to see the outcome. She settled for pennies on the dollar and signed a non-disclosure agreement. The room felt like it had dropped several degrees. "Carol Simmons." Ethan continued, his voice steady and relentless and gentle all at once, the way a good doctor delivers news they cannot soften. 51 years old, Bergen County, New Jersey, divorced. Met Victor Hayes through a mutual connection at a real estate networking event in Hoboken approximately 18 months ago. He told her he loved her within 8 weeks. She signed documents transferring partial ownership of her home to an LLC he controlled. When the relationship ended, when he ended it abruptly without explanation, she discovered the LLC had been used to take out a second mortgage against her property. She lost her home. He set the iPad down. She also filed a civil lawsuit. She also settled. She also signed a non-disclosure agreement. Elaine made a sound that I had never heard from her before. It started somewhere deep in her chest and came up through her throat and emerged as something between a gasp and a sob, and the specific raw exhalation of a person who has just had the floor removed from under them. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes, which had been dry through everything, through the messages, through the investigation and documents, through Victor's denials, finally filled, and the tears that came were not the quiet kind. They spilled over, immediately running down her face in 2 clean lines, and she pressed her hand harder against her mouth as if she could push the sound back in. Victor took a step toward her. "Elaine, don't." Her voice came out cracked and fierce from behind her hand. "Don't you touch me." He stopped. She was shaking. I could see it from across the room, a fine, full-body tremor that started in her hands and moved up through her shoulders, the physical manifestation of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time, suddenly losing its container. She looked at the iPad screen at the 2 photographs, Patricia Hendricks and Carol Simmons, 2 women she had never met, 2 women who had sat exactly where she was sitting now, and her face crumpled completely. "He did this before," she said. Not a question, a statement of fact spoken to no one in particular, spoken to the air, spoken to whatever version of the past 14 months she was rapidly and painfully revising in real time. He already did this, to both of them. And then she stopped, pressed her eyes shut. And then he came to me. Ryan, standing beside me, exhaled shakily. His hands were balled into fists at his sides, not in anger, I realized, but in the effort of not crossing the room to his grandmother. He was 17 years old, and he was watching his grandmother fall apart, and he was holding himself very still, because he did not know if comfort was his to offer. I looked at Victor. He had not moved from the spot where Elaine had told him not to touch her. He was standing very still, the particular stillness of a man who has run out of moves and knows it, but has not yet decided what to do with that knowledge. His arms were at his sides. The smooth, deliberate composure that he had carried into my home 2 hours ago was gone, replaced by something rawer and less managed. He looked for the first time all evening, like a man who understood that the room he was standing in had already decided something about him. I studied his face for a long moment, not with rage, not with the hot, unsteady feeling I might have expected from a man watching his wife weep over photographs of 2 women this person had already destroyed before turning his attention to her. What I felt was colder than rage and more permanent. It was the feeling of clarity arriving after a long period of fog, the specific crystalline understanding of exactly what kind of man was standing in my living room and exactly what he had come here to do. He had chosen Elaine the way a person chooses a tool. He had looked at her loneliness and her secrets and the particular shape of her unhappiness, and he had calculated with the precision of someone who had done this before and would do it again if given the opportunity that she was the right instrument for what he needed. He had made her feel extraordinary, so that she would hand him access to everything I had spent 30 years building. And when it was done, when the papers were signed and the transfers were complete, and there was nothing left to take, he would have ended it the same way he had ended it with Patricia Hendricks and Carol Simmons. Abruptly, without explanation, without looking back. She had never been part of his future. She had only ever been part of his plan. "Victor," I said. He looked at me. His jaw was set. His eyes were careful. "You came into my home," I said, "and you stood in my living room, and you called me a useless old man in front of my grandson." My voice was quiet, absolutely quiet, the kind of quiet that does not need volume to carry weight. "And you did it because you needed what I have built, not because you love my wife, because you needed a way out and she was the door you chose." Something moved through his face, a brief involuntary thing there, and gone before it could be named. He did not answer. He did not need to. Ryan stepped in without being asked, positioning himself at my shoulder. I felt him before I saw him, the warmth of him, the steady, deliberate presence of a 17-year-old boy who had understood something about this night that most grown men would have missed entirely. He did not speak. He simply positioned himself at my shoulder and stood there, and that quiet act of solidarity, unrequested, uncommented on, absolute, was enough to make something loosen in my chest that had been wound very tight for the past 2 hours. Elaine was still crying. Quietly now, the initial force of it had subsided into something more exhausted, a steady broken weeping that had no particular destination. She was looking at the iPad screen at the 2 women she had never met, and I thought I understood something of what she was feeling in that moment. Not just grief, not just the shock of understanding that she had been used. Something more specific and more devastating than either the recognition that the story she had been telling herself for 14 months, the story in which she was the protagonist making a brave and difficult choice, had never been her story at all. She had been a chapter in someone else's plan. "There's still more," Ethan said quietly beside me. "And it gets worse." Ethan closed the 3rd folder. He did not open the 4th one right away. Instead, he set the iPad down on the coffee table and turned to face me directly, and the expression on his face was the one I had seen exactly twice before in his life. Once when he was 11 years old and had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball and came to tell me before anyone else found out. And once when he was 26 and called me from the hospital at 2 in the morning to say that Ryan had been born 6 weeks early and was in the neonatal unit and he needed me to come. It was the expression of a man who is about to hand you something heavy and wants to make sure you are braced before he lets go. "Dad," he said, "what I'm about to tell you, I need you to hear it from me before you see it on the screen. And I need you to know that Sandra found it, not me. She came to me with it 4 months ago, and she was shaking when she did because she understood what it meant, and she did not want to be the one carrying it alone." I felt Ryan shift beside me, felt the slight change in his breathing, the way breath changes when a young person is preparing for something they sense is coming, but cannot yet name. "Tell me," I said. Ethan looked at me steadily. In the spring of 2010, a withdrawal was made from your joint personal checking account. The account you and Mom shared for household expenses, the one you used for property taxes, home, repairs, the regular costs of running this house. He paused. $180,000, transferred in 3 separate transactions across 11 days, each one structured to appear as a routine household expense in the account, records categorized under home repair and contractor payments, the kind of line items that would not draw a second look from someone reviewing the statements quickly. The number landed in my chest like something physical. $180,000. Richard, Elaine's voice came from across the room, and it had changed completely from what it had been an hour ago. The hard certainty was gone, replaced by something thinner and more desperate, a voice stripped down to its framework. Please, let me explain it before. Let him finish, I said. My voice came out quietly, not harshly, just quietly. Her breath hitched. She pressed her hand back over her mouth. The money went to a third-party account, Ethan continued. Sandra traced it through the bank records. The receiving account belonged to a man named Douglas Pruitt, Elaine's older brother. He looked briefly at his mother, and what was in his eyes was not accusation. It was grief, pure, uncomplicated grief. Douglas had accumulated significant gambling debts through online platforms, the kind that operate in legal gray areas and use aggressive collection practices. The debt was approximately $160,000. The remaining $20,000 appears to have covered interest and fees. I was looking at the window again, the dark glass, the faint reflection of the lamp. 14 years. I had sat across from Elaine at this table for 14 years of dinners and 14 years of holidays and 14 years of ordinary Tuesday evenings, and she had been carrying this, and I had never seen it, had never felt the weight of it on her side of the room. She intended to replace it, Ethan said. There's evidence of that in the record's small deposits over the following years, amounts that suggest she was trying to pay it back quietly without drawing attention. But the amounts were never enough to cover what had been taken, and eventually the deposit stopped. Ethan, my voice was rougher now. Where does Victor come into this? Ethan's jaw tightened. Victor came into this approximately 12 months ago. We don't know exactly how he found out, whether he had her investigated, whether it came up in conversation, whether someone told him. But what we know is that within 2 months of their relationship beginning, he had documentation of those 3 transactions. And he used it. Used it how? I said, though, I already knew. I already knew because I was 60 years old, and I had spent 30 of those years watching how people operated when they wanted something badly enough. And the shape of this was not new to me. It was just new to be inside it. He told her, Ethan said, that if she did not cooperate with his plan to access your assets, he would send the bank records to you directly. He framed it as a kindness, as protecting her from having to have the conversation herself. Ethan's voice had gone flat and precise, the way it goes when he is containing something large. What he was doing, legally speaking, is called extortion. Under New York, penal law, extortion is the act of compelling someone to take an action by threatening to expose information that would damage them. It carries a sentence of up to 15 years. Victor, from his position near the door, said nothing. Elaine was crying again quietly this time. Not the wrenching sobs of before, but a steady, exhausted weeping, the kind that comes when you have run out of ways to hold something in and your body simply takes over. Her shoulders curved forward, her hands hung at her sides. I was going to tell you, she said. Her voice was wrecked, barely held together. In 2010, I told myself I would tell you when Douglas paid it back. And then he didn't, and the years went by, and every year it got harder, because every year there was more time to explain, and I couldn't. She stopped, pressed her eyes shut. I couldn't find the way in. I stood up from the armchair. I walked to the window, the same window I had been staring at all evening, and I pressed one hand flat against the cold glass, and I stood there, and I breathed. Ryan came and stood beside me. He did not speak. He pressed his shoulder against mine, 17 years old, and already understanding that sometimes the most important thing a person can do for someone they love is simply refuse to let them stand alone. I closed my eyes. $180,000 and 14 years of silence, and a woman who had been so afraid of the conversation that she had walked straight into the arms of a man who used her fear as a weapon. I opened my eyes. Sandra, I said to no one in particular. She's been carrying this for 4 months. Yes, Ethan said. She came to you shaking. Yes. I turned from the window. She gets a raise, I said. Whatever she's making, she gets a raise. First thing Monday. Ethan almost smiled. It was a small thing barely there, but in the wreckage of that room, it felt like the first real breath of air in hours. Then I looked at Victor, and Victor looked back at me. And whatever he saw in my face made him take one very small, very involuntary step backward. Victor recovered faster than I expected. I will give him that. Whatever he was feeling in the moment, his foot moved backward. Whatever crack had opened in the surface of him, when he looked into my eyes, he sealed it over in the space of a breath. And when he spoke again, his voice had returned to something close to its original register. Smooth, measured. The voice of a man who has survived difficult rooms before, and believes he can survive this one. Richard, he said, I understand that tonight has been emotional for everyone, and I want to acknowledge that. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer, with 2 fingers, a deliberate, unhurried movement, like a man who is not reaching for a weapon, but wants you to watch him anyway. But before this goes any further, I think it's important that we introduce a document that your son has chosen very deliberately not to mention. He drew out a folded set of papers and held them up. This, he said, is a business partnership agreement, signed by Richard Callahan and countersigned by my firm 14 months ago. It establishes a formal consulting arrangement between Callahan Fine Interiors and Hayes Capital Advisors, and it grants Hayes Capital a minority stake in any revenue generated through a specific subset of commercial contracts. He set the papers on the coffee table beside Elaine's folder, smoothing them flat with his palm. Richard signed this voluntarily, in full possession of his faculties, with full knowledge of what he was agreeing to. He looked at me. Didn't you, Richard? The room went very still. Ryan's head turned toward me sharply. Ethan did not move, did not react, did not so much as blink, and that stillness, that absolute absence of surprise, told me everything I needed to know before I had even looked at the document. I have never seen that paper before in my life, I said. Victor spread his hands. Memory can be unreliable, particularly under stress. The signature is right there. 3rd page, bottom right. I think if you look carefully, Dad has never signed anything without Frank present, Ethan said. His voice was almost conversational, the way it gets when he is most certain of something. That has been true for the past 22 years. Every contract, every agreement, every amendment, Frank DeLuca reviews it first and witnesses the signature. Every single time. He looked at Victor. Did Frank witness this one? Victor's hands were still spread in that gesture of open reasonableness. The agreement was executed informally between parties who... So, no, Ethan said. Frank did not witness it. We knew it existed. Sandra found a draft copy of it in a shared cloud folder 6 weeks ago, which is exactly why we had it examined. He picked up the iPad. Because if Frank had been present, this conversation would not be happening right now. He turned the screen toward the room. 4 months ago, I retained a forensic document examiner, a specialist in question document analysis, which is the field of expertise used by the FBI, the Secret Service, and court systems across the country to determine whether signatures and documents are authentic or fabricated. His name is Dr. James Whitfield. He has 31 years of experience and has testified as an expert witness in over 200 federal and state cases. Victor's hands came down slowly. Dr. Whitfield examined the signature on that document. Ethan continued and compared it against 47 verified samples of Richard Callahan's signature collected from authenticated business records spanning the past 15 years. His conclusion, stated in a formal written report that is now in the possession of the New York Attorney General's office, is that the signature on that agreement was not produced by Richard Callahan. Ethan set the iPad on the table so the report was visible. The conclusion is stated with a confidence level of 94.7%. In forensic document examination, anything above 85% is considered conclusive. The paper that Victor had smoothed so carefully onto the coffee table sat between us like something that had been drained of all its power in the space of 30 seconds. Victor stared at the iPad screen. Something was happening to his face that I found difficult to look at directly, not because it was ugly, but because it was human in a way the rest of him had not been all evening. The careful architecture was failing. The smooth surfaces were developing fractures that could not be repaired with a breath and a recovered posture. He was looking at the forensic report the way a man looks at a door he was certain was unlocked when he discovers it has been sealed from the other side. Elaine had gone very quiet. She was standing near the fireplace, now had drifted there, sometime in the past few minutes, without anyone tracking the movement, and she was watching Victor with an expression that had moved entirely beyond tears. It was the expression of a woman doing arithmetic she did not want to complete, adding up months and conversations and moments that had felt at the time like love and arriving at a sum that bore no resemblance to the number she had been expecting. "Victor," she said. He looked at her. His jaw was tight. "Did you forge my husband's signature?" He did not answer. "Victor." Her voice cracked on his name, not with grief this time, but with something harder, something that had been soft and had gone rigid. "Answer me. The situation is more complicated than, did you forge his signature?" Each word landed separately like stones dropped one at a time into still water. Victor looked away from her, and Ryan, who had been standing beside me with his hands at his sides and his whole young body coiled with the effort of staying still, made a sound that was not quite a word, a short, sharp exhale of disgust, the sound of a person who has just watched something confirm what they already knew but had hoped would not be true. I reached over and gripped his shoulder once firmly, and he nodded once, and that was enough. "There is one more thing," Ethan said. He was looking at the door now, and there was something different in his expression, a quality of waiting, of listening for something the rest of us could not yet hear. "And it's not on the iPad." He took out his phone and checked the time. "Frank should be here in about 4 minutes, he said. 4 minutes is longer than it sounds. 4 minutes is long enough for a fire to find a wall. Long enough for a person to understand fully, and without any remaining possibility of doubt, the complete shape of what has been done to them. Long enough for a room full of people to rearrange itself quietly and without announcement into something different from what it was before." Ethan moved to the far end of the room and stood near the bookcase with his phone in his hand, giving his father space without being asked. Ryan followed him, not because he was told to, but because at 17 he had the instinct to understand when two people needed the distance between them closed, and when they needed it held open. That left me and Elaine. And Victor, who had retreated fully to the wall near the front door. Now his arms crossed again, his expression recalibrated into something that was trying very hard to be neutral and was not quite succeeding. I walked toward my wife, not quickly, not with anger in my body. I had spent 60 years learning that anger carried in the body rarely goes where you intend it to go, and tonight of all nights, I needed to go exactly where I intended. I walked to the spot in the living room where we used to stand together on New Year's Eve looking out the window at the neighbors' lights, and I stopped there and I looked at her. She looked back at me. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her cream-colored coat, the one I had never seen before, the one that still carried the faint trace of 3 weeks of European hotels, was rumpled. Now the collar turned slightly wrong, and there was a small streak of mascara along her left cheekbone that she had not wiped away. She looked for the first time in as long as I could remember exactly her age. I found that I did not know how to begin, so I began with the only question that felt true. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I said. "Any of it? The money in 2010? The way things were between us? Any of it, were you ever going to find the words?" Elaine's throat moved. Her hands hanging at her sides curled slightly, not into fists, just the reflexive curl of fingers that have nothing to hold on to. "I wanted to," she said. "I tried to Richard, 100 times. I would sit across from you at dinner, and I would think tonight I'll say it. And then you would talk about the Hendersons' kitchen renovation, or ask me what I thought about replacing the gutters, and I would think he's happy. He thinks we're fine, and I would tell myself I would do it next week instead." "Next week?" I said. "I know." Her voice broke on the second word. "I know how that sounds." "It sounds like 14 years, Elaine." She pressed her eyes shut. 2 tears escaped from the corners and ran down her face, and she did not move to wipe them. "I was ashamed," she said. "Not just of the money, of all of it, of the fact that I had let something fester that long without saying it. The longer it went, the more impossible the conversation became. And then, Victor—" She stopped, her jaw tightened. "And then Victor found out, and suddenly I didn't have a choice anymore. And I told myself that maybe it was easier, that if someone was forcing my hand, at least I didn't have to be the one who—" She broke off again, pressing her fingers against her lips. "God, I can hear how that sounds." "Tell me something," I said. She opened her eyes. In 14 months with him, in all those conversations, all those dinners, all those nights, when he was telling you that you deserve better than what we had did, he ever once asked you what you actually wanted, not what he was offering, not what he was planning, what you wanted? Elaine stared at me. The question sat between us, and I watched her turn it over, watched her go back through 14 months of memory looking for the answer, and watched her face change as she looked and did not find it. No, she said finally. Her voice was barely above a breath. He never did. I asked you, I said. For 35 years I asked you. Every major decision we made together, the house, the business, where Ethan went to school, when we traveled. What we built, I asked you what you wanted. I didn't always get it right. I know I was absent sometimes in ways that mattered. I know the business took more of me than it should have, and I know there were years when you needed me present and I gave you the company instead. I felt something tighten behind my sternum. Not anger, not grief, but the specific ache of a man confronting the parts of himself he would change if he could. But I asked. He never asked. And I think somewhere underneath everything that happened, you already know the difference. Elaine's chin trembled. Her whole face was doing something complicated, collapsing and steadying and collapsing again, like a structure that keeps finding new reasons to hold on. Victor from the wall made a sound the beginning of a word, an attempt to insert himself back into the geography of the room. Elaine. His voice was careful, calibrated. You don't have to stand there and let him. Victor. She did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on mine. I need you to stop talking. A beat of silence. Please, she added. The word was quiet, and it was not for his benefit. It was for her own, a woman drawing a line in the only space she had left. Victor closed his mouth. Ryan from the far end of the room exhaled a long, slow breath of relief that he probably did not know Eve was holding. I heard Ethan shift his weight, heard the small sound of his shoes on the hardwood, and then neither of them moved or spoke because they understood the way good people understand these things, that this moment did not belong to them. It belonged to 35 years of a marriage trying to say goodbye to itself, with whatever honesty it had left. I'm not the man you needed me to be, I said. Not always. I can own that, Elaine. I can stand here and tell you that there were failures on my side of this, that contributed to the distance between us. But what you did, I paused. What you let him do, I know, she said. Her voice was wrecked, completely wrecked, hollowed out a voice that had nothing left to perform for anyone. Richard, I know. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you for anything. She stopped, pressed her eyes closed again. When she opened them, there was something in them that I recognized from a very long time ago, something I had not seen in years. I just need you to know that I am sorry, not because of tonight, because of all the nights before tonight when I should have been braver and I wasn't. The doorbell rang. Frank. I held Elaine's gaze for one more moment, one long, full moment in which 35 years moved between us like weather, and then I turned toward the door. Frank DeLuca has been my attorney for 30 years. He is 63 years old, 5'10", with silver hair. He has worn the same way since I met him in 1994, comb back, no product. The kind of haircut that communicates that the man wearing it has better things to think about than his haircut. He carries the same black leather briefcase he has carried for as long as I have known him, worn smooth at the corners, now the brass clasps replaced twice. He does not own a cell phone case because he says cases are for people who are not careful with their things, and he has never once in 30 years been late to a meeting. He was not late tonight. He stepped through the front door, shook my hand with the brief firm grip of a man who understands that a handshake in a difficult moment is not a greeting, but a statement. And then he looked at the room, took it in the way he takes in every room quietly and completely missing nothing, and set his briefcase on the end of the dining table without being invited to. Frank, Ethan said. Ethan. Frank nodded at him, nodded at Ryan, looked briefly at Elaine, not unkindly, but without warmth. Then he looked at Victor with the specific expression of a man who has spent 30 years reading people across negotiating tables and has already formed his opinion. Mr. Hayes, Frank said. Victor said nothing. Frank opened his briefcase, removed his reading glasses from the front pocket of his jacket, and settled them onto his nose. Then he reached across the table and picked up the manila folder that Elaine had placed there when she first walked in. The folder she had smoothed so carefully, the one that had started all of this, and he opened it. He read in silence for approximately 90 seconds. The only sounds in the room were the faint tick of the clock on the mantelpiece and the soft, steady sound of pages turning. Then Frank set the folder down and took his glasses off. Richard barfed, then he said, "I need to explain what is in this document because I want you to understand precisely what would have happened if you had signed it tonight without reading it carefully." He folded his glasses and held them loosely in one hand. The first section is a standard divorce agreement. Property division, spousal support, provisions, procedural timelines. It is aggressive in several places, but it is not unusual. A competent matrimonial attorney could contest several of the terms, and we would. He paused. The problem is not the first section. He reached into the folder and withdrew a separate sheaf of papers, perhaps 12 pages clipped together, tucked behind the divorce agreement in a way that would not be immediately visible to someone flipping through the folder quickly. "This," Frank said, "is what I want everyone in this room to look at." He held it up. This document is titled a Business Transition and Consulting Agreement. It is written in the language of a routine commercial arrangement, the kind of paperwork that passes through corporate attorneys' offices dozens of times a week without much scrutiny. On the surface, it appears to formalize a consulting relationship between Callahan Fine Interiors and an entity called Hayes Capital Advisors, LLC. Frank set the pages on the table and smoothed them flat with his palm, the same deliberate gesture Victor had used earlier, except that where Victor's gesture had been theatrical, Frank's was surgical. What it actually does, buried in Section 7, subsection C on page 9, is transfer 40% of all future revenue rights from Callahan Fine Interiors Commercial Contract Division to Hayes Capital Advisors, LLC, a company that as of the date this document was prepared is solely owned and controlled by Victor Hayes. The room was very still. 40%, I said. 40%, Frank confirmed. Structured as a revenue share rather than an equity stake, which is a deliberate choice. Revenue share agreements are harder to unwind than equity transfers, and they do not trigger the same disclosure requirements under New York business law. Whoever drafted this knew exactly what they were doing. He looked at Victor over the rim of his glasses. The signature line for Richard Callahan appears on page 11. It is formatted to appear as though it is part of the divorce agreement, same font, same header, same page numbering sequence. Someone signing the divorce agreement in a hurry, or under emotional duress, or simply without adequate legal counsel, present might reasonably reach page 11 and sign without fully understanding that they were executing a separate commercial document. Victor's arms were crossed. His face had gone very still. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of a man who is choosing very deliberately not to move. Under New York penal law. Frank continued his voice, carrying the even unhurried cadence of a man who has explained complicated things to frighten people for 30 years. A scheme to defraud, which is what this document represents, is a criminal offense. The statute defines it as a systematic ongoing course of conduct with intent to defraud 10 or more persons, or to obtain property from 10 or more persons by false or fraudulent pretenses. Given the 43 investors already documented in the Attorney General's existing case, that threshold is met several times over. Given the documentation that Ethan has already provided to the New York Attorney General's office regarding Mr. Hayes' prior conduct, the threshold for that definition is not difficult to meet. Frank set his glasses on the table. If Richard had signed this tonight, he would not merely have transferred revenue rights. He would have become an unwitting participant in a fraudulent scheme. The civil and criminal exposure for an unknowing signatory is limited, but the process of extricating oneself from that position is expensive, time-consuming, and damaging to professional reputation. Elaine made a sound, a small compressed sound, somewhere between a gasp and a moan, and pressed both hands flat against the front of her coat. Her face had gone the color of old paper. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "Frank, I swear to you I did not know that was in there. He told me it was standard paperwork, that it was just formalizing—" "Mrs. Callahan," Frank's voice was not unkind. "I believe you." He said it simply without elaboration, and somehow that simplicity was more devastating than any accusation could have been a 63-year-old attorney with 30 years of experience saying, "I believe you," to a woman who had almost helped destroy her husband's life, and meaning it. Elaine covered her face with both hands. Ryan took one step toward her, stopped, looked at his father. Ethan gave a very small shake of his head. Not yet. Victor unfolded his arms. I want to be very clear, he said. His voice had shed the last of its smoothness now. What remained was harder, more angular, the voice underneath the performance. I am not going to stand here and be characterized as a criminal by a Mr. Hayes. Frank looked at him, just looked at him with the patient, immovable expression of a man who has heard every version of this particular speech before. I have one more document to share with this room, and after that, I think you will find that you have very little left to say. He reached into his briefcase. What Frank pulled from his briefcase was not a thick document. It was a single folder, dark blue, the kind of folder that holds something that does not need to belong to matter. He set it on the table beside the divorce papers and the separate business agreement, and the three of them sat there together, Elaine's plan, Victor's trap, and whatever was inside that blue folder, like three different versions of the same evening, laid out for comparison. Frank opened it. In the spring of 2005, he said, Richard came to me with a concern. The business was expanding. He was taking on larger commercial contracts, which meant larger liability exposure. He wanted to make sure that, regardless of what happened with the company, a lawsuit, a bad year, a creditor issue, the family home would be protected. Frank smoothed the top page with 2 fingers. We discussed several options. The one we chose was an irrevocable trust. He looked up at the room. An irrevocable trust, he said, for the benefit of everyone present, is a legal arrangement in which assets, in this case, the property at this address in Oyster Bay, are transferred out of the owner's personal estate and into a separate legal entity. The word irrevocable means exactly what it sounds like. Once the trust is created and the assets are transferred in the arrangement, cannot be undone, amended, or dissolved by the person who created it. The property no longer belongs to Richard personally. It belongs to the trust. He paused. Richard is the trustee, which means he manages the property and lives in it. But he cannot sell it, cannot transfer it, and cannot use it as leverage in any legal proceeding, including a divorce settlement, because it is not, in the legal sense, his to dispose of. He turned to the second page. Ethan Callahan is named as the remainder beneficiary. Upon Richard's death, the property passes directly to Ethan, outside of probate, outside of any divorce settlement, and outside of any claim that might be made by a former spouse. Frank set the page down. The trust was filed with the Nassau County Clerk's Office in June of 2005. It has been a matter of public record for nearly 20 years. Victor's arms had dropped to his sides. He was staring at the blue folder with an expression I had not seen on his face all evening, not the tactical reassessment from earlier, not the manufactured calm, not the hardened anger from when Frank had begun dismantling his documents one by one. This was something simpler and more complete. This was a man understanding for the first time that the thing he had come here to take had never existed. Elaine, Frank's voice was gentle. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. She raised her head. Her hands had dropped from her face. Her eyes were red and swollen and exhausted, and she looked at Frank with the expression of a person who has run out of things to brace for. Do you remember sitting at the dining table in this house in the spring of 2005? Frank asked. Richard was there. You were there. I was there. We spent approximately 40 minutes going through the trust documents together. I explained what irrevocable meant. I explained what remainder beneficiary meant. I asked you specifically if you had any questions before you signed. Elaine's chin trembled. I remember sitting there, she said quietly. I don't remember. I had a lot on my mind that day, Frank. Ethan had just started at his new school, and I was worried about whether he was settling in, and She stopped, pressed her lips together. I thought it was a formality. I thought you were just protecting the business somehow, and the house was mentioned, and I signed, and I didn't. Her voice broke completely. I didn't think it would ever matter. I know, Frank said. I know you didn't. But you signed it, Elaine, with full legal capacity and with counsel available. The document is valid in every respect. He closed the blue folder, which means that this house, the one you came here tonight to claim, has not been yours to claim since George W. Bush's first term. Ryan made a sound that was almost a laugh and caught himself immediately pressing his hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking once with the effort of containing it. Ethan looked at the ceiling briefly. I looked at my grandson and felt for the first time all evening something that was not grief or anger or the heavy waterlogged weight of betrayal. It felt something like air. Victor turned to Elaine. "You told me," he said, and his voice had shed every remaining layer of composure, "that the house was jointly owned. You told me it was community property. You told me I thought it was." Elaine's voice was hollow. "Victor, I genuinely thought, you thought." He said the two words like they tasted wrong. 20 years of marriage and you didn't know what you owned. "And you," Elaine said, and something shifted in her voice. Something that had been bent for a long time, suddenly straightening, the way a branch straightens when the weight on it is finally removed. "Spent 14 months telling me you loved me, and the whole time you were looking at this house like it was an exit strategy." Victor opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. "I am done listening to you." Frank looked at Victor with the patient expression of a man who has one more thing to say and is in no hurry to say it. "There is also the matter of the post-nuptial agreement signed in 2015, he said, "which protects the business assets as well." Elaine had the right to independent counsel at the time of signing. She was offered representation through her own attorney, a college friend, who by her own later account reviewed the documents in under 20 minutes and told her it was standard protective language. Elaine signed a written waiver, declining a full line-by-line explanation. The agreement has since been reviewed and confirmed as valid by 2 separate family law practitioners. He picked up his briefcase. "I mention this so that there are no remaining questions about what is and is not available for division in these proceedings." He looked at Victor one final time. "Mr. Hayes," he said pleasantly, "I believe you came here tonight expecting to leave with something. I want to make sure you understand clearly and completely that there is nothing here for you to take." Victor moved away from the wall, not toward Frank, not toward the table with its collection of documents that had one by one dismantled everything he had come here to accomplish. He moved toward the center of the room, a deliberate repositioning the kind a man makes when he has decided that the only option remaining is to take up space and make noise and hope that volume and presence can accomplish what evidence and logic have failed to. "I am not going to be spoken to this way," he said. His voice had gone hard and flat-stripped of every layer of performance, and what was underneath was uglier and more honest than anything he had shown all evening. In someone's living room, by a 60-year-old man and his family and a lawyer who thinks 30 years of small-town work makes him an authority on Victor. My voice came out the way it comes out when I am done. Not loud, not angry, just done. "Stop." He looked at me. I stood up from the armchair. "I am 60 years old. I have 35 years of early mornings and difficult clients and buildings that did not go right and partnerships that fell apart and one marriage that I gave everything I had to even when it was not enough. I am not a large man, and I have never won anything with my size. But I have learned over 60 years that the most dangerous thing a man can project in a room is not aggression. It is the complete absence of fear. I walked toward him. Not quickly, not with my hands raised, just walked, and I stopped when there were 4 feet between us, and I looked at him directly. "You made a mistake, Victor," I said. My voice came out low, and even the way it comes out when I have nothing left to prove. "You mistook a quiet man for a weak one, and you thought 35 years of family could be dismantled with a forged signature and a folder left on a coffee table." I held his gaze. "That tells me everything I need to know about what you are, and you already know the rest." Victor's jaw worked. A muscle jumped in his cheek. "You don't know anything about me," he said. "I know everything about you," I said. "I know you owe $12 million to 43 people who trusted you with their savings. I know you forged my signature on a legal document. I know you found out my wife was carrying a secret and you used it against her for over a year, instead of giving her a way out." I held his gaze. "I know you looked at 2 women before her and did the same thing, and when it didn't work, you moved on and never looked back. And I know that when you walk out of this house tonight, you will not look back at her either." Something cracked in his expression. He turned to Elaine. This was the moment I had been bracing for the last play, the appeal to whatever remained between them, the attempt to use 14 months of intimacy as a lever. "Elaine?" His voice changed when he said her name. Softened, dropped, reached for something that might have once been genuine and no longer was. "We had a plan. You said you wanted this. You said you were done with this life, done with this house, done with—" "I said a lot of things," Elaine said. Her voice was not soft. Her eyes were dry. Now had gone dry somewhere in the past few minutes, exhausted past the point of tears. I said them because I was lonely and frightened, and you were very good at listening to frightened women and telling them exactly what they needed to hear. She took one step toward him. But you never asked me what I actually wanted, Victor. My husband pointed that out tonight, and he was right. Victor stared at her. Ryan came to stand at my right side, without a word, close enough that I could feel the steadiness of him, 17 years old and straight-backed, and that quiet proximity was enough to keep me from saying something I could not take back. Ethan moved to my other side, 3 of us, in a line, in my own living room. Victor looked at us, Frank behind the table, Ryan and Ethan flanking me. The blue folder and the forensic report and the fraud documents spread across the coffee table like an accounting of everything he had attempted and failed, and the last of whatever he had come here with left his face all at once. The New York Attorney General's office, Ethan said quietly from beside me, has received every document we have presented tonight, the forensic report, the fraud complaint, the extortion evidence, the civil case records from New York and New Jersey. He paused. They've had it for 3 weeks. Victor looked at him. 3 weeks, Ethan said. The room held. Victor uncrossed his arms. He straightened his jacket, a small, reflexive gesture, a man reassembling his exterior when the interior had already collapsed. He looked at Elaine one final time, and what passed through his expression in that moment I will not pretend to fully understand. Whatever it was, it did not look like love. It looked like calculation meeting its limit. He turned toward the door. He did not say her name. That was the thing I kept coming back to afterward in the days that followed, when the house was quiet, and I had time to sit with what had happened and turn it over. In 14 months and whatever it was that had passed between them, all those dinners and phone calls and 3 weeks in Europe, and all the plans they had made standing in rooms I had never seen, he had learned her name and her history and her fears and the exact shape of the loneliness she carried. And when the moment came to leave, when everything had been stripped away and there was nothing left to take and no reason left to perform, he walked to my front door and he opened it and he stepped through it and he did not say her name. Not once. The door closed. Elaine stood in the middle of the living room with her coat still on and her hands at her sides and her eyes fixed on the door, and the expression on her face was one I will carry for a long time. It was not grief, not exactly. It was the look of a woman who had spent 14 months believing a story about herself and had just watched the last page of it fall away. Outside, we heard his car start. The engine turned over once caught, and then the sound moved away down the street and around the corner and was gone. 30 seconds of quiet. Ryan's hand found my arm, not gripping, just resting there, warm and present the way his hand used to rest on my arm when he was 4 years old. And we walked through parking lots together, and he was not frightened but wanted the contact anyway. "Grandpa," he said, just that. Just my name in his mouth. I covered his hand with mine. Elaine made a sound. It came from somewhere so deep inside her that it barely had shape when it reached the air. Not a sob, not a word. Just a sound. The kind that escapes when a person has been holding something so tightly for so long that when it finally lets go, the release itself becomes a wound. Her knees buckled, not completely, just a sudden terrible softening, like a building settling, and Frank, who was closest, moved without hesitation and put his hand under her elbow and steadied her. She did not pull away from him. She stood there supported by a 63-year-old attorney who had spent the evening dismantling the life she had tried to build around her secrets, and she breathed. In and out, her chest heaving with the effort of it, her shoulders shaking, her eyes still fixed on the door that had closed and was not going to open again. "He didn't even say my name," she said. Her voice was so quiet I almost did not hear it. "No," I said. "He didn't." She turned to look at me, then slowly, with the careful movements of a person who is not entirely sure the ground will hold, and what was in her eyes was so raw and so undefended that I had to work to hold her gaze. This was not the woman who had walked through my door 2 hours ago with a folder full of papers and a man behind her, and 35 years of marriage reduced to a transaction. This was someone I recognized from much earlier, from before the distance, before the silence, before all of it. Someone I had not seen in a very long time. "Richard," she said. "I know," I said. I did not know exactly what I was responding to, but she nodded as if I had said the right thing anyway, and looked back at the door. Ethan moved quietly across the room and sat on the arm of the sofa, not close to her, not imposing, just present. Ryan stayed at my side. Frank set his glasses on the table and folded his hands and waited the way he has always waited, with the patience of a man who understands that some moments need to be moved through before they can be moved past. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. The house settled around us, all its familiar sounds. The particular creak of the upstairs hallway, the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the faint whistle of the December wind finding the gap in the study window that I have been meaning to seal for 3 winters now. My house. The one Frank had helped me protect before I knew it needed protecting. The one my grandson had helped me hold on the night someone tried to take it. "I think," Elaine said, finally, her voice stripped of everything except what was true, "I think I need to sit down." Frank guided her gently to the sofa. She sat, looked at her hands in her lap. The cream-colored coat was still on. She had not taken it off once since she walked in, and she looked in it like someone who had arrived somewhere and was only now understanding they had no idea where they were going next. Ryan looked at me. His eyes asked a question he did not know how to put into words. I shook my head gently. "Not yet." "Ethan," I said. "Ryan, give us a few minutes." Ethan stood. He put his hand briefly on his mother's shoulder, one firm, quiet press, and she flinched slightly at the contact. Not away from it, but into it. The way you flinch towards something that hurts because the hurt means it is real. Then he touched my arm as he passed, and he and Ryan moved toward the kitchen, and Frank followed them without being asked, because Frank has always known when a room needs to be smaller. The door to the kitchen swung shut behind them, and then it was just the two of us. Just Richard and Elaine in the living room of a house that had belonged to a trust for 20 years on a Friday evening in December, with 35 years sitting between us, like something that had fallen and could not be picked back up, only acknowledged, only named, only finally honestly looked at. I sat down across from her, not on the sofa beside her, on the chair facing her, the same armchair I had been sitting in all evening, the one with the worn armrest. The distance between us was perhaps 6 feet. It felt like considerably more. Elaine had taken her coat off while the others were leaving. She had folded it carefully and set it on the cushion beside her, and the gesture had the quality of something done without thinking, the automatic tidiness of a woman who, even in the wreckage of an evening, folds things. She was wearing a dark blue blouse underneath. I recognized it. She had bought it in the spring 2 years ago, on a Saturday when we had driven into the city together for no particular reason, and ended up wandering through Soho for an hour before finding a place for lunch. It had been a good day. One of the last ones that felt uncomplicated. I looked at her hands in her lap. She looked at mine. "How long did you know," she asked, "that something was wrong between us?" I thought about it honestly. "Longer than I admitted to myself," I said. "You stopped reaching for me in the mornings, not all at once, gradually. The way temperature drops in October, you don't notice any single day, but one morning you reach for a jacket and you think, when did it get cold?" Elaine's throat moved. "I didn't think you noticed." "I noticed everything," I said. "I just didn't know what to do with what I noticed, so I worked, because working was something I knew how to do." She looked down at her hands. "That's what I told myself," she said, "that you chose the business over us, that if you had just been present more, been home, more asked more questions, I wouldn't have been so—" She stopped, her jaw tightened. "But that's not fair, is it? Victor was present. Victor asked questions, and all Victor wanted was what you had built." "Yes," I said, "and I handed him the map," she said. "I told him everything, where the documents were, what Frank's role was, how the accounts were structured. I thought I was—" Her voice broke on the next word, and she pushed through it. "I thought I was building something new. I was just giving away what you built." The clock ticked. Outside, the wind moved through the bare oak at the corner of the yard. I could hear it, that particular sound, the one that means December has fully arrived and spring is a long way off. "Elaine," I said, "I want to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly." She looked up. "Were you happy before all of this? In the years before Victor? Were there years when you were genuinely happy?" She stared at me for a long moment, and then slowly something in her face softened, not with grief, not with guilt, but with something more complicated and more human than either. "Yes," she said. "The early years, when Ethan was small and we were still figuring out how to do all of it, and we were too tired to be anything but honest with each other." She paused. "And some years in the middle when the business was doing well and we took that trip to Maine and Ryan was born and everything felt full, like there was enough of everything to go around." Her eyes grew bright. And then it got quieter. And I didn't know how to tell you that the quiet was scaring me, so I said nothing. And the nothing got louder and louder until I couldn't hear anything else. My chest ached, not with anger, not even with grief exactly, with the specific pain of recognizing a thing you could have addressed and didn't not. Because you didn't care, but because you were busy caring about other things, and you told yourself, there was time. There was always time. You would get to it next week, next month, next year, and then one day you looked up, and the quiet had become a wall. I should have asked, I said. I should have sat across from you exactly like this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and asked you what was scaring you, and I didn't. No, she said. You didn't. We let that sit between us, not as accusation, just as fact. I'm not going to ask you to stay, I said finally. I'm not going to ask you to undo the divorce papers or explain yourself to Ethan or rebuild something that I paused. That may have needed to be rebuilt long before tonight. Elaine pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet again, but quietly the overflow of something too full, not the wrenching release from before. What are you going to ask me? She said. Nothing, I said. I just wanted to sit across from you one more time without anything between us. No papers, no lawyers, no Victor. I looked at her, at the woman I had chosen 35 years ago on a rooftop in Manhattan, with the city lit up below us and the whole future open in front of us, like something that had not yet decided what it was going to be. You were a good mother, I said. Whatever else happened, you were a truly good mother. And I want you to know, I never stopped being grateful for that. Elaine closed her eyes. The tears came quietly running down her face in two steady lines, and she did not wipe them away. She sat with them, and I sat across from her, and neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then she opened her eyes. I'm sorry, Richard, she said. Not for tonight, for all the nights I should have been braver. I know, I said. I stood up, walked to the kitchen door, pushed it open. Ethan and Ryan were at the kitchen table, Ryan with his phone face down in front of him, Ethan with his hands wrapped around a mug of something hot. Frank was standing at the counter looking at his own phone, giving everyone the privacy of pretending not to be listening. We're ready, I said. They came back into the room quietly. Ethan first, then Ryan, then Frank. Single file unhurried the way people move through a house after something large has happened and the air has not yet settled back into its normal shape. Ryan had brought his backpack from the sofa where he had left it hours ago, and he held it by one strap at his side, and the sight of it, that ordinary blue backpack, the homework inside it, the life of a 17-year-old that had been sitting quietly in the corner all evening, while the adults around him burned things down and built things back up, made something tighten behind my eyes that I refused to let go any further. Frank set his briefcase on the dining table and opened it one more time. He removed a document I had not seen before. Clean pages, no highlighted clauses, no buried business agreements, no forged signatures anywhere in the vicinity. He set it on the table and smoothed it flat and looked at me over his glasses. This is a standard dissolution of marriage agreement, he said. Property division reflects the trust documents, the post-nuptial agreement, and what is actually available for equitable distribution under New York law. Elaine's attorney will need to review it before it is finalized. This is not the end of the process, only the beginning of it. But it establishes the framework, and it is honest. He said that last word the way he says things that matter, without emphasis, just clearly. I picked up the document and read it, all of it, every page, every clause, every number. Frank had taught me to do that 30 years ago. Never sign what you have not read. Never trust the summary when you can read the thing itself, and I had not forgotten. It took 11 minutes. No one spoke. Elaine sat on the sofa with her coat folded in her lap. Ryan stood near the bookcase looking at the titles on the shelves, the way people look at things when they are waiting and need somewhere to put their eyes. Ethan stood near the window, hands in his pockets, watching the street outside. When I finished, I set the document down. I picked up Frank's pen. And then I stopped. Not because I had changed my mind, not because I was uncertain. I stopped because 60 years had taught me that some moments deserve one full second of acknowledgement before you move through them, not to mourn them, not to dramatize them, just to stand in them for one breath and understand that they are real and that you are the person living them. I looked at Elaine. She was already looking at me. Her hands were still in her lap. Her eyes were dry, now had gone dry somewhere during the time she had spent alone in the kitchen, as though she had used everything up and come out the other side of it into something quieter. She looked tired. She looked in the lamplight exactly like a woman who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and was only now beginning to understand what it feels like to set it down, even when setting it down is its own kind of loss. I signed. 3 places, initials on page 4, signature on page 7, full name printed on page 9. Frank witnessed each one, countersigned, where required, and set the pen down with the small definitive click of a man who has just closed something that needed to be closed. I set the document on the table. And then I looked at Elaine one last time, and I said, the thing that had been sitting in my chest all evening underneath everything else, waiting for the moment when there was nothing left to say before it. The only thing I lost tonight, Elaine, was the version of you I believed in for 35 years. I held her gaze. And I am going to miss her. I already do. Elaine's face crumpled. Not into tears. She was past tears, I think, had moved beyond them, into something that had no easy expression. Her chin trembled once, and her mouth pressed together, and she nodded a single small nod. The kind that means, I hear you, and I'm sorry, and I know, and I cannot fix it all at once. Ryan made a sound behind me. A small, unguarded sound, the sound of a 17-year-old boy who has held himself together for 4 hours and is reaching the limit of it. I turned and looked at him, and his jaw was working hard, and his eyes were bright and wet, and he was staring at a point somewhere above the bookcase with the focused determination of someone who has decided absolutely that he is not going to cry in this room tonight. I crossed to him and put both hands on his shoulders. "Hey," I said. He looked at me. His eyes spilled over just once, just briefly, and he pressed his lips together and breathed through his nose and nodded the way young men nod when they are trying to be steady. "You did good," I said. "You did exactly right. I need you to know that." Ryan swallowed hard. "I just didn't want him to—" He stopped, started again. "I didn't want you to be standing there alone." "I know," I said, and I wasn't. I pulled him in and held him for a moment, my grandson 17 years old, who had spent months preparing for a night I had not known was coming, who had stood in my living room and looked his grandmother in the eye, and said the words that changed everything, and I felt his shoulders shake once, just once, before he steadied. Then I stepped back and looked at Ethan. My son was watching us with an expression that I will not try to describe, because some things that pass between fathers and sons do not have adequate language, and I would rather leave the space where the language would go than fill it with something insufficient. I put my hand on his arm. He covered it with his. Frank closed his briefcase with the soft double click of the brass clasps. "I'll file the initial papers Monday morning," he said. "The process from here takes time. There will be more steps, more conversations, more documents, but the framework is in place." He looked at me. "You should get some sleep, Richard." I almost laughed. "Take care of yourself, Frank," I said. He nodded, picked up his briefcase, shook Ethan's hand, ruffled Ryan's hair in the affectionate, slightly formal way of a man who is not given to displays of warmth, but makes exceptions for the people who have earned it, and then he walked to the door and let himself out. I listened to his car start. I listened to it move away down the street. And then the house was quiet, really quiet for the first time all evening, and it was just the 4 of us and the lamp still on and the documents on the table and the December dark pressing gently against every window. Elaine stood up from the sofa. She picked up her coat. She looked at me and then at Ethan, and then for a long moment at Ryan. "Ryan," she said. He looked at her. "I love you," she said. "Whatever you think of me right now, and you are allowed to think whatever you need to think, I love you." That part was never complicated. Ryan's throat moved. He did not speak, but he looked at her, really looked at her, and he nodded. It was enough. Elaine walked to the front door. She put her hand on the knob. She paused there for a moment, her back to the room, her coat over her arm, and I thought she was going to say something else, something final, something that would serve as a period at the end of the sentence of our marriage. But she did not. She opened the door and stepped out into the December night, and the door closed behind her, and that was the end of it. Or rather, that was the end of what it had been. What it was going to be next was something none of us could see yet from where we were standing. 3 days later, the world was still turning. I know that sounds like the kind of thing people say, the world keeps going, life goes on. All of those phrases that are true and also insufficient, but I mean it in the most literal sense. 3 days after the longest Friday evening of my life, I woke up at 5:45 in the morning because I have woken up at 5:45 in the morning for the better part of 30 years. And the alarm was the same alarm, and the light through the bedroom curtains was the same gray December light, and the house made the same sounds it always makes when the temperature drops overnight and the wood contracts. The world was still turning. I just had to figure out how to turn with it. Ethan had stayed the first 2 nights. He and Ryan had taken the guest room and the pull-out sofa, respectively. And those 2 days had the particular texture of days that follow large events, quieter than you expect. More domestic, full of small practicalities that need attending to, because life does not pause for devastation. We replaced the weather stripping on the back door. We watched a football game on Saturday that none of us particularly cared about. Ryan made pancakes on Sunday morning, using a recipe he claimed was foolproof, and that produced in practice something closer to very thick crepes, which we ate anyway because they were his and he had made them. On Monday morning, the 23rd of December, Ethan drove Ryan to school and came back to find me in the kitchen with coffee and the previous day's newspaper, which I had not gotten around to reading because the previous day had involved a long call with Frank about the preliminary divorce filings and another call with my operations manager about the Henderson project. And by the time those were done, I had run out of capacity for the news. We sat at the kitchen table together. "How are you sleeping?" Ethan asked. "Better than I expected," I said, which was true. The first night had been long and fractured, full of the kind of half-sleep where your mind keeps returning to a particular room, a particular hour, a particular expression on a face you have known for 35 years. But the second night had been deeper, and I had woken on Sunday with the surprising discovery that the thing I felt most was not grief. It was something closer to relief. Not the relief of escape. I did not feel I had escaped anything, because you cannot escape 35 years, they go with you regardless. But the relief of clarity, of knowing finally and completely the shape of the thing you have been living inside. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from not knowing, from sensing something without being able to name it. And when the not knowing ends, even when what replaces it is painful, the exhaustion lifts in a way that feels almost like rest. "Sandra called yesterday," Ethan said. He wrapped his hands around his mug. "She wanted to know if you were all right. I told her you were." "Was that true when you said it?" Ethan considered. "Close enough." I nodded. "Tell her I'll call her this week, and tell her about the raise." "I already did," he almost smiled. She said, and I quote, "Tell your father that is completely unnecessary, and also thank you very much." I did smile at that. A real one, the first in several days that did not feel like something I was performing. My phone buzzed on the table between us. Frank DeLuca. I picked it up. "Richard?" Frank's voice was the same as it always is, measured, unhurried, carrying information, the way good attorneys carry information, which is to say, without editorializing. "Victor Hayes was arrested this morning at his apartment on the Upper West Side. The Attorney General's office executed the warrant at approximately 7:15. He is currently in processing at the Manhattan Detention Complex." I set my coffee mug down carefully. "All right," I said. "I wanted you to hear it from me directly," Frank said. "There will likely be press coverage. The AG's office occasionally issues statements on cases of this size. If anyone contacts you for comment, refer them to me. I will. Are you all right?" "Yes," I said. "Thank you, Frank." I ended the call. Ethan was watching me across the table. He had heard enough from my side to understand. He did not ask. He just looked at me with the quiet, waiting expression of a man who will let his father arrive at whatever he needs to say in his own time. The kitchen was warm. The coffee was good. Outside the window, the backyard oak was bare against a pale December sky, and the bird feeder I had hung from its lowest branch, a thing Elaine had bought at a garden center 3 summers ago, and that I had not taken down because it still had seed in it, and the birds still came, was turning slightly in the morning wind. I looked at it for a moment. Then I heard the front door, Ryan back from wherever Ethan had dropped him, moving through the hall with the particular sound of a teenager who is trying to be quiet and is not entirely succeeding. He pushed open the kitchen door, saw us both at the table, and stopped. "What happened?" he said. He could read a room my grandson had been able to since he was small. "Victor Hayes was arrested this morning," I said, "in Manhattan." Ryan looked at me, then at his father, then back at me. "Good," he said. He said it the way you say a thing that is true and simple and does not require elaboration. Then he dropped his backpack on the floor beside the door, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down. He looked at the coffee pot. "Is there enough for me?" he said. Ethan laughed a short, surprised sound, the laugh of a man who has been holding tension for 3 days and has just found an unexpected exit from it. I reached for the coffee pot and poured Ryan a cup, and he wrapped both hands around it the way I have always wrapped both hands around mine. And the three of us sat at the kitchen table in the December morning light, and for a while nobody said anything, and it was enough. It was, I thought, more than enough. The New York Supreme Court building on Center Street in Manhattan is not what most people picture when they hear the word courthouse. It is large and gray and neoclassical, with columns across the front that look like they were designed to remind you that the law existed before you did and will exist after you are gone. I have walked past it many times over 30 years of doing business in the city. I had never been inside until the second Tuesday of January, when Frank and I took the elevator to the 8th floor and walked down a corridor that smelled like floor wax and old paper, and the particular institutional quiet of places where important things are decided without much ceremony. The divorce proceeding was scheduled for 9 in the morning. We were early. Frank is always early. He says that being late to a legal proceeding is a form of argument you have already lost, and I have never had reason to disagree with him. The hearing room was smaller than I expected, not a courtroom in the dramatic sense with a gallery and a jury box, but a conference-style room with a long table and chairs on both sides and a raised bench at the front where the judge would sit. There were 2 windows on the far wall looking out onto a gray January sky that had been threatening snow since morning and had not yet delivered on the threat. Elaine was already there when we arrived. She was sitting on the opposite side of the table with a woman I did not recognize her attorney, a composed-looking woman in her 50s with dark hair and a leather portfolio open in front of her. Elaine was dressed simply in a charcoal blazer and dark pants, and she looked like she had slept better than she probably deserved to and worse than she probably needed to. She glanced up when we came in, and our eyes met for a moment across the table, and then she looked back down at her hands. I sat down beside Frank, opened my water bottle, looked at the judge's bench, and waited. The judge arrived at 9:02, a woman in her late 60s, silver-haired, with the brisk and unsentimental efficiency of someone who has spent decades sitting across from people on the worst days of their lives and has learned that the kindest thing she can offer them is to move the proceedings forward without unnecessary delay. She introduced herself, confirmed both parties were represented, and opened the file. What followed was not dramatic. That was the thing I had not expected, or perhaps had expected, but had not fully believed until I was sitting in it. 35 years of a marriage reduced in the procedural sense to a series of documents reviewed in sequence. Frank presented the Callahan family irrevocable trust. The judge reviewed it, asked 2 clarifying questions, and confirmed that the Oyster Bay property was excluded from the marital estate. Frank presented the postnuptial agreement from 2015. The judge noted that Elaine had been independently represented at the time of signing. Elaine's attorney confirmed this, and the agreement was accepted. The marital estate, once the trust assets and the business interests protected under the post-nuptial agreement were removed, was considerably smaller than Victor had apparently led Elaine to believe it would be. There was the joint account now significantly reduced from its 2010 balance for reasons that Frank had documented carefully and that the judge noted without comment. There were retirement accounts. There was a secondary property in Connecticut that we had purchased as an investment in 2012 and never done anything with, and that both of us through our attorneys agreed could simply be sold and the proceeds divided. Elaine's attorney was competent and professional and did not attempt anything that Frank had not already anticipated. There were no scenes. There was no shouting. There was a brief recess at 10:15, during which Frank and I stood in the corridor, and he told me the Henderson project had come in under budget, and I told him I already knew, and we talked about the weather for 4 minutes, because we are both 60-something men from the Northeast, and talking about the weather is what we do when we are waiting for large things to finish. When we went back in, the judge finished her review, asked if either party had anything to add, received no additions, and announced that she would issue a written ruling within 30 days. That was it. 35 years, a written ruling within 30 days. I looked across the table at Elaine while the judge was gathering her papers, and Elaine was already looking at me, had been, I think, for a little while, in the way you look at someone when you know it is one of the last times you will look at them in this particular context, in this particular room, as these particular people to each other. She did not smile, neither did I. but there was something in her face that I recognized, a kind of stripped-down honesty, the expression of a person who has been through something large enough to burn away the performance, and what remains underneath is just the person, tired, clear, no longer pretending. I thought, looking at her in that moment, that she might be all right eventually, not soon, not without difficulty, but eventually. I hoped so. Not for my sake, just because hoping that people you have loved for a long time will be all right is one of the things you do not stop doing, simply because the love has changed its shape. Elaine stood when the judge left. She said something quiet to her attorney, who nodded and began collecting documents. Then Elaine picked up her bag, and she looked at me one more time across the table, and she said very quietly, "Take care of yourself, Richard." "You too," I said. She nodded, walked to the door, did not look back. Frank and I rode the elevator down in silence, the comfortable silence of two old friends who have just finished something difficult and do not need to discuss it immediately. In the lobby, he stopped and looked at me. "Lunch?" he said. "Yes," I said. We went to a diner on Chambers Street that Frank has been going to since 1987, and that has not changed its menu in approximately that long. I ordered coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich and sat across from my attorney of 30 years. And we talked about the Henderson Project and the weather, and a book he had been reading, and the afternoon light came through the diner windows at a low January angle and lay across the table in a long, pale stripe. And outside, the city moved and rumbled and went about its business the way it always has, indifferent to the specific weight of any one person's particular Tuesday. It was, I decided on the way home, a perfectly adequate Tuesday, under the circumstances that felt like more than enough. February came in quietly. Not the dramatic February of blizzards and school closings, just the ordinary kind, gray and cold and honest about it. The kind of month that does not pretend to be anything other than the last hard stretch before the world remembers how to be warm again. The oak tree in the backyard was still bare. The bird feeder was still turning in the wind. I had refilled it twice since December, which I took as evidence that I was in some basic functional sense still attending to things. Ryan had fallen back into his regular rhythms: school, his part-time job at the hardware store, 2 towns over Friday evenings at my house. The Friday evenings had become something I looked forward to in a way I had not expected and did not examine too closely the way. You do not examine things that are working, for fear of understanding them, into stopping. He would arrive around 5, drop his backpack by the door, raid my refrigerator with the focused efficiency of a teenage boy who has decided that a grandfather's kitchen is an extension of his own, and then we would end up in the living room or the kitchen doing whatever the evening called for. Sometimes talking, sometimes not. Sometimes watching something on television that one of us wanted to see and the other tolerated with good grace. It was on a Friday in the second week of February that I found the letter. I had gone out to get the mail in the late afternoon, the way I always do, around 4 o'clock when the light is already going, and the cold has a particular quality to it that I have never been able to describe exactly, not sharp, just present the way certain feelings are present, unavoidable, without being dramatic. There were the usual things: a water bill, a catalog. I had not subscribed to a card from a client thanking me for the Henderson Project. And at the back, a plain white envelope with no return address, addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately. Elaine's handwriting. The particular slant of it, the way she forms her capital letters, the slight leftward lean that has not changed since I first saw her sign her name at a restaurant in 1989, and thought absurdly that it was beautiful. I stood at the end of the driveway for a moment, holding the envelope, with the February wind moving through the oak above me, and the neighbor's dog barking at something 3 houses down, and the ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon going on around me as if the envelope in my hand were any other piece of mail. Then I went inside. Ryan was at the kitchen table when I came in, his textbook open in front of him, a half-eaten apple on the plate beside it. He looked up when I set the mail on the counter, and he saw the envelope in my hand, and he read the situation the way he always reads situations, quickly, accurately, without making a production of it. "What's that?" he said. "A letter from your grandmother." He looked at it for a moment, then he looked at me. "Are you gonna read it?" I set it on the kitchen table, looked at it. The envelope was sealed carefully. She had always been careful about small things like that, about presentation, about the way things looked from the outside, and my name was written across the front in full. Richard. Not Rich, not the nicknames that accumulate over decades of a shared life. Richard, formal and deliberate, and in some way I could not entirely articulate kind. "Maybe," I said. "Just not today." Ryan nodded. He did not push. did not ask why, did not suggest that I should or should not, did not offer an opinion on what the right thing to do was. He just nodded and looked back at his textbook. And I was grateful for him, in the specific way you are grateful for people who understand that sometimes the most useful thing they can do is simply not make something harder than it already is. I put the letter on the counter beside the coffee maker, where I would see it every morning. Then I poured myself a glass of water and sat down across from Ryan, and after a moment I asked him how school was going, and he told me about a history project he was working on, something about the economic causes of the First World War, and I told him that I had written almost exactly the same paper in 11th grade, and that my teacher had given me a B-, and told me I had a tendency to overstate my conclusions, which Ryan found genuinely funny. And we sat there in the kitchen with the February light fading outside the window and talked about the First World War and B- grades and whether the hardware store was going to give him more hours in the spring. My phone buzzed. "Ethan." "Hey," I said. "Hey." His voice carried the particular quality it gets when he has good news and is trying to deliver it without making it sound like he has been waiting to deliver it. "So I talked to Sandra today. Is she all right?" "She's more than all right. She got the paperwork for the raise this week, and she wanted me to tell you." He paused, and I could hear him almost smiling. "She said, please tell your father that I did not do what I did for a raise, and also, I am going to use this raise to buy a very good coat, and I want him to know that." I laughed. It came out of me the way laughter sometimes does when you have not expected it, sudden and genuine and slightly larger than the room seemed to have space for. And Ryan looked up from his textbook with his eyebrows raised, and I shook my head and waved my hand in the way that means, "I'll explain in a minute," and he grinned and went back to the First World War. "Tell her," I said when I could, "that she should buy the best coat she can find, and tell her I said thank you, from me directly, not through you." "I'll tell her," Ethan said. A pause. "How are you doing, Dad, actually?" I looked at the letter on the counter, at Ryan at the table, at the window where the February dark was settling in around the edges of the yard. "Actually," I said, "actually, I thought about it honestly the way I have been trying to think about things since December, without the buffer of optimism, without the performance of resilience, just the plain truth of how things are. I'm doing better than I expected," I said. "Some days are harder than others, but most days I get up and the work is there, and Ryan comes on Fridays and Frank calls when he needs to, and the birds come to the feeder, and I paused. "I'm all right, Ethan. I think I'm actually all right." A beat of quiet on the line. "Good," Ethan said. Just that. The same word Ryan had used 3 days after the longest Friday of my life, in the same kitchen, about a different piece of news. One syllable carrying everything it needed to carry. "Good," I said back. After I hung up, I sat for a while at the kitchen table with Ryan, and the letter stayed on the counter where I had put it, and I looked at it once more before Ryan and I moved to the living room for the evening, and I thought about what might be inside it, not with dread, not exactly, but with the careful, measured attention you give to something you are not ready for yet, but know you will be eventually when the time is right. The time was not right yet, but it was getting there. Spring came back the way it always does. Not all at once, never all at once, but in increments the way good things tend to arrive. First, the light changed, gaining an extra few minutes each day, until one morning you look out the window and realize it is still bright at 6 in the evening, and you cannot remember exactly when that started happening. Then the oak tree in the backyard put out its first tentative leaves, small and pale and uncertain, the way new things are when they are not yet sure of their welcome. Then the apple tree along the south fence, the one I planted in 2008, the year Ryan was born, for no particular reason, except that it seemed like the kind of thing a person should do when a new life enters the world, began to blossom. White flowers, small and simple, opening quietly in the April warmth, as if they had somewhere to be and were in no hurry to get there. I had been sitting on the porch for most of the evening, not doing anything particularly, not reading, not thinking about any specific thing, not waiting for something to arrive or preparing for something to come. Just sitting in the way that you learn to sit when you are 60 years old and have been through the kind of year that rearranges your understanding of what sitting quietly is actually worth. The porch chairs, 2 of them, wooden painted white some years ago, and now showing the honest wear of seasons, had been out since March. I had carried them out from the garage on a Saturday afternoon in early spring, the same way I do every year, and the ritual of it had felt different this year in a way I did not try to name, just different. Quieter maybe, more deliberate. as if I understood in some part of myself that had not understood it before, that carrying the porch chairs out in March and sitting in them in April was not a small thing. It was the kind of thing that constitutes a life. Ryan arrived at 5:15, which was slightly later than usual, because he had stopped at the hardware store to pick up his last paycheck before the spring semester got too busy. He came around the side of the house rather than through the front door. He has been doing this since he was small, when he discovered that the gate latch on the side fence is easier to manage than the front door handle, and some habits established at 7 years old survive everything, and he found me on the porch and dropped into the chair beside me without ceremony. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. We sat for a while. The April evening was warm enough that neither of us needed a jacket, and the light was doing the particular thing it does in Long Island, in the spring, coming in low and golden across the yard, catching the apple blossoms, making the whole garden look like something that had been lit deliberately by someone who understood exactly what they were doing. "How was work?" I asked. "Good. Henderson came in while I was there." I raised an eyebrow. "Which Henderson?" "The son. The one who manages the properties now." Ryan leaned back in his chair, stretching his legs out in front of him, his sneakers crossed at the ankle. "He said the kitchen turned out better than he expected. Said to tell you." "That's good," I said. "He asked if you were taking on new projects." "I'm always taking on new projects," I said. Ryan smiled. "That's what I told him." The kitchen door opened behind us, and Ethan came out with 2 glasses of lemonade he had let himself in with his key. The way he does on weekend evenings now, arriving quietly without announcement, folding himself into whatever the evening already is rather than changing it. He handed 1 glass to Ryan, 1 to me, and then he sat down on the porch steps with his own glass and his back against the railing facing the yard. 3 of us. The porch. The April evening. The apple tree in blossom. I had not read the letter yet. It was still on the counter by the coffee maker, where I had put it in February. I had moved it once, just once, to wipe down the counter underneath it, and then placed it back exactly where it had been, and there it had stayed, through the rest of February and all of March, and now into April. Every morning I saw it when I made my coffee. Every morning I looked at it and considered it and made my coffee and went on with the day. I was not avoiding it, or perhaps I was in the technical sense. But it did not feel like avoidance. It felt more like patience, like allowing myself the time to arrive at something, rather than forcing my way through it before I was ready. Ryan had asked about it once more, a few weeks after the Friday in February when it arrived, not pushingly, just the way he asks things, which is to say directly and without pressure, as if he genuinely wants to know and will accept whatever the answer is. "Have you read it yet?" he had said. "Not yet," I had said. He had nodded, and that had been the end of it. He had not asked again. I suspected he would not ask tonight either, and I found that I was grateful for this in the particular and inexpressible way you are grateful for people who know when to let a thing be. "Grandpa," Ryan said from the chair beside me. Can I ask you something? You can always ask me something." He turned his glass in his hands, that gesture, the 2-handed hold on a glass or a mug that I had first noticed in the kitchen in December, and that I had since come to understand was simply how he holds things careful and complete. "Do you think she's okay, Grandma? Do you think she's doing all right?" I looked at the apple tree for a moment. "I think," I said carefully, "that she is probably working on it, the same way the rest of us are working on it." I paused. "She made some very bad choices, and she was also taken advantage of by someone who was very good at taking advantage of people. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I don't think either of them cancels the other out." Ryan considered this. "Is that how you think about it? Both things at once?" "It took me a while to get there," I said. "But yes." He nodded slowly, looked out at the yard. The apple blossoms moved slightly in a breath of evening wind, and a few petals came loose and drifted down into the grass below, in the unhurried way of things that are not falling, but simply letting go. Ethan on the steps turned his glass in his hands. He did not say anything. He was looking at the garden with the expression he gets when he is thinking about something, and has decided not to speak yet, and I knew him well enough to leave him to it. I looked at Ryan at the side of his face in the golden April light, the jaw that was his father's, the set of his shoulders that was. I had recently decided entirely his own, and I felt something move through my chest that I did not have a precise name for. Not grief, not quite joy. Something in between, or something that contained both, without being reducible to either. "Ryan," I said. He looked at me. "I want to tell you something. and I need you to hear it properly, not just let it go past you the way 17-year-olds let things go past them when they think the person talking is being sentimental. The corner of his mouth moved. I'm listening. Your great-grandfather Elaine's father broke ground on this lot with his own hands. He and I finished it together the year your grandmother and I were married. He signed the deed over to us the day Ethan was born, and I put it in trust the year the business started growing faster than I could protect it. He was not a sentimental man, and he did not say things he did not mean, and the one thing he told me, the one time he pulled me aside before Ethan was born, before any of this, was that the most important thing a man can build is something worth protecting. Ryan was very still. In December, I said, when you stood up from that sofa and looked at your grandmother and said what you said, you were protecting something. Not the house, not the business, something that doesn't have a deed or a filing number or a line in any legal document. I held his gaze. You were protecting the idea that the people in this family tell the truth and stand up for each other. And you did it without being asked, and without making a speech about it, and without expecting anything in return. I paused. You're the kind of person who shows up when it matters, and then sits down, and doesn't make a big deal out of it. Ryan's jaw tightened in the way it does when he is working to hold something together. I learned it from you, he said. His voice was rougher than usual. You and Dad. You showed up every day for 35 years. That's not nothing, Grandpa. Even when it was hard, even when things weren't right, you showed up. My chest ached with something that was not pain. Yeah, I said. We tried. Ethan set his glass down on the step beside him. He did not look at us. He was still looking at the yard, at the apple tree, at the last of the golden light laying itself across the grass. But his shoulders had changed, softened slightly, and I knew he had heard everything, and I knew that was all right. The three of us sat in the particular quiet of people who have been through something together and come out the other side of it. Still standing still, here still willing to sit on a porch in April and drink lemonade and talk about what matters, and let the silences between the talking be comfortable rather than empty. The apple tree held its blossoms against the evening sky. The bird feeder turned slowly in the last of the wind. And the house, my father-in-law's house, the house in the trust, that would one day be Ethan's, and after that perhaps Ryan's if he wanted it, if life took him in that direction, stood behind us solid and quiet, and exactly where it had always been. Not mine to give, never mine to give, mine to live in, mine to tend, mine to sit in front of on a spring evening with my son and my grandson and a glass of lemonade watching the light go. That it turned out was more than enough. That was everything. I have thought about what this family story taught me, and I keep coming back to the same truth. The most dangerous silence in a marriage is not the silence after a fight. It is the silence before the conversation you are too afraid to start. Don't be like me. I saw the distance growing for years, and I chose to work harder instead of asking harder questions. I told myself there was time. There is never as much time as you think. If I am honest, and I think I owe you that much, I believe that what saved us was not cleverness, and not the paperwork, and not the law. It was a 17-year-old boy who understood that the people he loved were worth showing up for. God put that instinct in him, and I am grateful every day that he did. My personal opinion, family betrayal doesn't always look like a villain. Sometimes it looks like someone you trusted making small choices over a long time until the small choices become something you cannot take back. That is the family betrayal I did not see coming, and that is why this family story matters to me. If this story stayed with you, if something in it felt familiar or true, drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. These stories contain some fictional elements created entirely for the purpose of meaningful storytelling. If this type of content is not for you, we completely respect that. Please feel free to explore other content that better suits you.